Okay, I'd like to call this meeting of the Berlin-Boylston Regional School Committee's Budget, Facilities, and Safety Subcommittee to order. Okay, so thanks for coming. Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. So today we're just gonna take a look at. Oh, this is the old agenda, but
is it?
yeah, it's. Or did I send
pull the wrong
old
one?
agenda? No, it says.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Monday, December 16th.
I pulled the wrong one. That's
fine.
I was like, why
I'm
is
looking at the
Hunter
wrong
Fields
agenda,
on
but
there?
today that's fine.
That's what I did.
That's what you
Oh,
want.
one
That's
of
what
the
she's saying.
Rolled it into the right.
There's-
there was
there's-
two
hyperlinks
for the
I'm
listing
so
of
sorry.
the meeting. There's two hyperlinks.
Okay.
The date is a hyperlink for today's
Yeah.
agenda. The name of the committee is a hyperlink from
The agenda for
December's
today is
agenda.
just 25 and 26 budget, right? We're talking.
Yep. So today we're just gonna.
Okay,
Aaron's
good.
gonna kind of roll through with it. Yeah, we talked about the Tohoto.
Done with the
Field.
Hunter Fields.
So
for
wait
now.
a minute. Do we have an accurate agenda for today's meeting?
There is an accurate agenda
With today's date?
posted.
Yes.
Yeah, I made an agenda and I asked Nicole to post
There's
it.
two links for the same
Yeah.
date.
But we have an accurate posted agenda
Yes.
with the agenda. Okay, that's all I need to know.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, perfect. Good.
Beth, I'll have to talk to you after. Your email like bounced back to me. Did you get the email from me? Yeah, that something's wrong. Okay, that's fine. So anyways, so today we're going to go over the FY26 budget, and then we're just going to backtrack to see how we're doing for FY25.
Yep. I have
All right, so without
report.
further ado, we'll
Sure.
let Aaron
Sure.
kind of take it away. This is very high level.
Yep. So as you all know, you have a little presentation. This is for 26. I have all the detailed stuff. If anybody wants to come in and see every single line item, you're welcome to. This was high level for the towns. So we did a presentation for each town, then I combined the two, and this is what I'll also be kind of sharing at school committee tomorrow. So, just kind of walking through it, I'm going to be real high level right now. But the first sort of slide talks about some of those important pieces of information that go in. This is extremely early in the cycle. We don't get state data until the end of January. We won't have health insurance information until the end of January, early February. We have our bus contract going out to bid by January 15th. So I'm hoping before we have to do a budget hearing, we'll have some numbers in on that. But I've got some assumptions in for that. I don't know how familiar people are with the out-of-district move-in laws, but when there are high-cost out-of-district students, if up until April 1st, if those happen, if someone moves into our district or moves out, they would come onto our books or come off our books, which is helpful. After April 1st, the other district, whoever that student came from, has to continue paying it for the next year. So it's just in recognition of the fact that an out-of-district student can cost $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 sometimes, and for you to suddenly get that after you've already kind of made your budget and have it prepared to go to the towns for things like assessments, it's not reasonable to say now you're going to absorb another couple $100,000, right? So if you're not familiar with it, that's really what that law means. So literally up until April 1st, we could get a move-in.
Yeah.
I recall a few years ago at Hamden Wilbraham, we had a $300,000 student move in, do the paperwork the morning I gave the presentation in the evening, and I didn't know that student existed, so I didn't even tell the school committee until the next morning. So we had the meeting on a Thursday night. I gave the budget presentation, so we had a meeting, an executive session after that. We sort of figured out where we juggle some money from, but that's just the reality of the way budgets work. So we try to work with that. I'm still working on some of the underlying numbers for assessments. We just got charter numbers in, so your formula is weighty. It involves a lot of data coming from multiple sources. So I need to know who the vocational students are, the choice students are, the charter students are, and weigh all of that. I just got charter in. I have vocational and working on a few other things. So I've used last year's numbers to project this year's numbers. So the splits. And then one of the items we talked about at both towns, but I'm not sure if the towns are prepared for that, is we're literally asking for money for student and staff devices, so Chromebooks in classrooms
Yep.
for one-to-one, things like that, every single year on capital, right? So at some point, the logical move is to say maybe that should go into operations. The challenge is the towns take capital money and operations money from different pools, right? So we end up in a challenge. They're hesitant to want to move that over into operations. It might be something that we, if we have a particularly good year and we have some move outs, maybe we work with the towns to make that move when that happens. We had that happen in Hamden, Wilbraham. We were able to move. We were doing the same thing. So we were able to move it into operations. So
Yep.
that's, there may be some timing, but I think it's something I will bring up just every year. Maybe we should move some of it, do it in pieces, whatever.
Pieces, yep.
Yep.
Phase it in.
Yep.
Well, what about like creating a reserve for it?
Yep.
Do towns do that? I don't know.
So I guess one of the things worth talking about is, setting up a capital stabilization account,
Yeah.
maybe for Tohoto, whereby, the towns are having to put in, up in fluctuating amounts of money. If there was a known amount, and there's some trust involved in that, but if the towns were to collectively put in a couple $100,000 a year,
Yep.
just into an account, we're not going to ask for capital unless we can't pay it out of that.
Yep.
But we just consistently use that. Some districts do that. The town schools are going to be a little harder, but the Honto, I think that might be a doable thing to do. But
Yep.
again, not something I want to rush into and try to jump into. I think
Tohoto
we
is
need
getting
to build
older,
some
right?
trust.
There are some things, right? So when
Yeah.
I think
We need-
about that,
we need to understand,
that many kids
It's-
coming through that
yeah.
building every single day,
Yep.
right? So we don't have a big reserve
Yep.
put aside for that in case something should
And we
go
call
wrong.
it the new building, but it's not that new anymore.
It's not.
Right?
No.
And I mean, last year we had the scoreboard broke. We
Yep.
had to
Yep.
redo the gym floors a second time. We had the ice machine broke. I mean, there was multiple things
Yep.
they
Sure.
couldn't get around,
Yep.
Yep.
and all that had to get pulled from school choice.
And,
Yep.
and the computer thing, back to that for a second,
Yeah.
I so agree with Aaron saying, but we're really going to put a tech plan together, so you'll get
Yeah.
a chance to meet on Tuesday. Our new interim tech director starts. He actually doesn't start work until January 21st, the day after Martin Luther King. But the new interim is Joe Spizzato that I'll introduce you to tomorrow. And his first task is a 5-year tech plan. Like, what are we looking at? Not only do we have a lot of kids on Chromebooks, we have some teachers that are using different devices, right? So we're trying to get some consistency there. So that's his first charge, to start working on that. So that will help. Because that was helpful.
Yeah.
It'll be helpful to towns. The towns are looking for that. Particular town of Berlin asked for that as well.
Yep.
So we had someone from Boylston, Matt Meekum,
Yep.
donated last year a bunch of Dell. I think they were Dell
Sure.
devices for teachers.
Sure.
So that's how we're getting things. Have been coming in piecemeal.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, or maybe they were HP. I can't even remember. But yeah, you're right. It's not consistent.
No, I'm
Yep.
sorry. We just
That's
have an
fine.
issue on
Yep.
the schools.
No,
Excuse
go
me
ahead.
for a second.
Go ahead.
All right. Sorry.
Okay,
move
so
on.
getting into the
Moving on.
next
Yeah.
gets into some of the major drivers that we're dealing with this year. Health insurance came in at just about 18% increase for our
massive.
retirees. That's a massive
It's massive, yeah.
increase.
Yeah, it's
So
massive.
I base on the best information I have. The best information I have on insurance costs is those retirees. So that's what I have in here. So when you see some bigger numbers, I don't expect that regular employee insurance is going to come in at 18%, but it could come in at 10%. So, 10% in this budget will be a win. I just don't want to, I want to go with what I have. Teacher salaries, we're in a negotiating year. I know Beverly and Marblehead just closed at 5.33% a year. That's a big increase.
Huge, yeah.
So I have an amount in there. I obviously don't want to share it publicly because, but we have to put some number in there just for salaries.
So just for Lisa and
yeah.
Beth, the first year I was on the school committee, I think the increase in the teacher's contract was 1.5%. And this past contract was at 2.5, 3.3. So you do it in 3 years. So that's why it says 16. It's not 16 over every year. It's 16
Yeah.
over 3. So
Yep.
the last one that we negotiated, I think Laurie and I, that was at 2021 or 2022.
Mhm.
It was like 2.533, or it was like 333. It was something like that. So like to go from 1.5, which is what it was. I think it was like 2020 or 2021. It was 1.5, and then to go all the way up to 5%. I mean, that's
Yeah.
what's driving these huge, massive increases, and we
Yeah.
don't realize like that's our main expense. Like that's a big deal.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money when you're talking 5% on what, like 10, 12, 20
Yep.
million dollars, $10 million of salaries, but.
And
so it's
separate from
huge-
that,
huge
you'll
relief.
also see it includes 6 weeks of paid parental leave. So
Mm-hmm.
that is leave they get separate from sick leave. So
Mm-hmm.
right now, if someone is going to take parental leave, of course we support it and what have you, but they take that out of their sick leave.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to say what that cost could be because it may vary by year. You may have one person get pregnant in 1 year, you may have 8 people get pregnant in another, and if spouses choose to take that time off as well, this is parental leave, it's not just maternity, so it's a little broader. So that it's hard to figure out what number to put into a budget for that, right?
Yeah.
So we're bidding, I think I mentioned we're bidding regular transportation out. I have a 7% sort of placeholder in there. I had a bit of a shock when someone from Assabet Valley said that they've seen bids come in at 50% increases. So we'll see. My hope is that we can get some competition and try to keep people fair. But 7% is probably not unreasonable. Special education transportation, we do that through Assabet Valley. And that's separate from Assabet Valley Vocational. This is Assabet Valley Collaborative. And so they're renegotiating their contract with Vanpool right now. So there were some, in their contract with Vanpool, there were apparently some pretty big issues with information they need. So they need rider information in order to do special education transportation reimbursements. And Vanpool wasn't providing that. And unfortunately, I think in the contract, there probably wasn't clear information about what Vanpool needed to provide. So I think both sides are going back, and I've just got 10% in there just as a number for now. I think they'll settle down and figure out what that is, and I'm hoping it'll be less than 10%. But special education transportation is really challenging too. There are very few people who provide significant special education. Vanpool is about the only big player in the game, and there are no real specific bidding requirements. And when you're the only really player in the game and you've got almost a monopoly, it gets really hard to fight them on price. So 10% is not.
Was this the
Yes.
one that increased by like
Yes.
what 50%?
It was so it was like 100 and something a run, and it went like between $400 or $500 a run.
Yeah.
Last year, or at least that was what we were
Yeah.
told.
Yeah.
And there's just nothing you can do about it, because if you have a kid on a that needs to get out of district, or needs to go wherever, you have to pay for that transportation. So, or if you need a kid that can't ride the bus, has to ride in the van pool, you have to have that, and it's So yes, it went up more than 50% last year. It was like 100 a run, and it went to like 400 or 500, or maybe even 600 a run. I don't know.
Yeah.
That was, again, it was like Aaron was saying, it was like all these pieces we're trying to estimate. We don't want to be shortchanged in the end and not have the money, because then if there's a situation and we have an emergency during the year and we need the money, what do we do? So that went up a lot last year.
Yeah. But hopefully these will shake out before we have to have our budget hearing. So that's
the thing so last
hoping
year,
to be.
that was another thing that we probably could spend a couple minutes discussing. So last year we did it late, and Berlin was really upset about that. We tried to do it as late as possible. I think we voted like March 19th maybe.
Yep.
So we moved everything up. So I think this year we're voting like February 25th, I think it is.
Yes.
Which, again, so we're trying to Boylston had no issues with it, but I think Berlin, they have their warrant out I think their warrant comes out, they need the stuff for the warrant sometime in February.
Yeah.
So, we're not, this isn't like a drop dead date. If you're telling us, the budget's gonna be way too rough, we don't have all the figures to vote in February.
I think we'll have enough of them. with Al. I've talked to Al about it a little bit. So interestingly, prior to my taking this job, and I guess now the public, I had a trip planned, and I come back Monday, and our hearing is on Tuesday. So if there's a way to just kick it a couple days, like
Monday the 24th, you come back?
Yeah.
I mean, we could.
Yeah,
Oh.
It's not a long trip. It's 5 days.
I think we're
but I'll
meeting
be a
March
couple
11th.
days. Yeah, so I mean, if we could even push that budget hearing back 2 days, it would change. This
Or is it March 4th?
Conversation for Mike and Al, but I just in transparency want to make sure that.
Yeah, I mean, we'd have to vote on it.
I mean, I can be there the 25th, but it might be better to have a couple days.
Yeah, and I think
We
the
need to
other
talk
thing
about
is,
anything.
how accurate are these numbers going to be? I think the more accurate, the more information. I know we have to wait for the Chapter 70 and, estimating these transportation costs. I'd rather, quite honestly, have it accurate than rush the vote. I don't know how you guys feel.
Most of this should be in place by then.
Okay.
I think we play it by
we're
year
talking
up
like
until the
7
start
weeks.
of February. Yeah. We've got to play it by year.
So, yeah.
And then we have to post our budget hearing, and we have to put
Yeah,
it
it has to be in the newspaper. Yeah, we went
so we
through
do
this,
need to make sure
Yep.
that, we can't.
I think it's
you
like
know,
14
can't just kick it
days or
down the
something like
road.
that. Yeah, no, you can't. So, I mean, if you want to change the date of the hearing, we got to.
Yeah, so we should have that
Bring it up-
conversation sooner rather than later.
Yeah, bring it up to the school.
Yeah.
We have a school committee tomorrow.
I know.
That's the time to do it because I think
Yeah.
after that we don't meet until the first week in February.
Right.
So that'd be too late.
Yep.
Okay.
Fair enough. So you've got stuff on other insurances. All of our other insurances have been ranging high. The reality of insurance is it's a giant pool, right? A giant national pool. So Florida, North Carolina, now California, all weigh in on the overall insurance costs. So there's some based on our own experiences, but there's some that's based on sort of the whole nationwide pool. And that's becoming a challenge. Additionally, all the costs of fuel, materials, things like that to do repairs when there are damages is higher. So insurance has been bumping up year after year pretty significantly. So I think 10% is reasonable there. I've talked to the folks from our insurance company, and they seem to think that it should be less than that. But I'd rather be high now than low. You will see in some of the others we talk about, we have a fair number of agency hired paras. So we are struggling to hire paraprofessionals as regular employees. So we are paying almost $30,000 more per paraprofessional to hire them through an agency. So you will see that's in the budget in a couple places. It's challenging. So
one of the things that we had planned to do for this current fiscal year, and I know you and Al got thrown into this, was to hire, like the nurse. We know we need that nurse. So we had talked about hiring. I mean, that was something I remember. That was one of the first things we did when I got on the school committee. Was they wanted that extra nurse, the floater nurse. That shouldn't be a contracted position. We should hire out that position. We need it. We've proven it over the years. The person's busy. They're never not doing. We were like, oh, what if they have downtime? What if they're not? So we thought contracted at first, but last year we were like, no, I think it was in the budget last year even to hire some of those positions out. So I don't know if you guys have a plan to do that, but I get the paras because I know there's a lot of turnover with that. But at least for the nurse, it seems like that would save a lot of money. To hire that in-house. So I don't know if who's in charge of that or if that's a plan.
So the person who, the agency is actually the full-time nurse at Tohoto. Is an agency. Is an agency.
And I thought we were planning to hire that.
We really need to.
Okay, we need to. All right.
Yeah.
So but you're still keeping it in the budget to be
yes,
conservative.
It hasn't been
because it hasn't been done and we don't know how long it will take.
Right,
okay,
right.
But
We
that's an
know.
opportunity somewhere there.
So there are a lot of opportunities here if we can get some paras. Hopefully we don't have to hire more agency paras. We're trying. We're really working hard. I think there's some things we will change in terms of how we post positions and where we post positions. So we typically post positions on School Spring, which is a very school-based hiring app. It does pull School Spring postings over to Indeed. But we're thinking there may be, is that a
ladybug just
ladybug?
landed on
Yes,
my
we
hand.
have ladybugs all over
Oh.
here. Maybe we could get it.
I was literally like this.
If you want to give it to me, I'll put our ladybug friend in the plant.
That's good luck for the budget season.
Supposedly, I'm like, don't land in my smoothie.
Yeah, they're all over the place. Yeah, so where else can we advertise? Can we do monster.com? Can we do the paper? Can we do what have you? So it's going to take a little time, but I think by this summer we'd like to really open up the number of places we post.
Yep.
Because
It's like a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
For the paras, like, they come from a broad background. To limit
Yep.
it to just like school-based people is a missed
right,
opportunity.
right. And
And the nurses too.
Yeah.
yeah, yep. I mean, the other thing too is, I mean, these are now union positions, right? And
The paras are, yep.
The union should have some concern about that too, that we're hiring this many agency people who
Yep.
aren't members of the union, right? They have no support from the union, they don't pay dues, things like that.
Yep.
So getting down to kind of the brass tacks, you get into what our total budget is. So our 25 total operating budget was $24,793,000. The budget that I have right now is at $26,449,000 for a budget increase of about 1.6 million, 1.65 million. So it's a pretty hefty increase. It's about 6.6. But again, a lot of these things I'm hoping are going to come in lower. In my experience, they should. I'm not making promises, even though I know I'm on video and the world can see this, but we're doing what we can.
This is a level service budget. This includes nothing new. So
Nothing
this
new.
doesn't account for any type of growth or if we need any
No.
new teachers, which I know
No.
at BES.
And we're going to have those conversations.
Right.
Yes.
So this is just
Yes.
level.
Yes.
This is getting nothing else. This is just keeping the doors
Yes.
open as is
Yes.
and not cutting
Given
anything.
this number, I didn't feel like adding a bunch of things to it.
Not now.
Right now. I think if we can bring this down and we can show that, you know, some of these things come in below expectations significantly enough that we can make some pretty solid cuts to this, I think then we start talking about what we put in.
Right.
I just, you know, do I go to the towns with a 12% budget now? That would be, you know, that would be very hard to swallow. So I just felt like let's start with this, and we can have those other conversations afterwards and down the road.
It seems like you're very cautious, you know, and like making sure that you're like above, you know,
Yeah.
what might happen. And I'm just wondering, like in your history and doing
Mm-hmm.
all of these, like, do you typically come in like a few percent higher, you know, than what it actually is?
Meaning,
Like what the increase would be?
I think, for example, yes, I think, for example, our health insurance will not be 18%. I just, you know, that number for retirees scared me. I also, you never want to be in a position where you start with a low number and then have to add over time. So I always say, look, my goal is to give you, this is kind of the higher end of what it's going
Like
to be.
worst case.
And we're going to keep sharpening our pencil, right? Like, we'll get over the shock of what I just showed you, right?
Yeah.
And over time, we'll all have a little cry and we'll figure things out. And I will keep working on this, you know, daily as we go. I'm meeting with principals this week just to discuss and make sure they're, you know, I didn't miss anything, that you know, that if there's things that they think they can play with, you know, within the budget without going higher, you know, we'll work on those. So it's just a constant process from here through February and then even beyond. So when we have the budget hearing, we'll have the hearing. If something comes up, there's no reason we can't vote a lower budget after that. So if the school committee votes a budget, there's no reason we can't then try to meet with the FinComs. If we
Right.
know it's high, say, look, can we meet in the middle somewhere? What room do we have? What can we do?
Before town
here's
meeting,
our
right?
needs. Yeah. The goal is to do that as early as possible, right? So, you know, we have that budget. We get to the point where we're at budget hearing and we have a number, and we vote it, but the towns say that's too high. Then we have some conversations. I don't know if you've done sort of joint meetings. I'm assuming you have. We
Joint
bring
meetings
in,
for what?
We bring in the select boards, the FinComs,
Yeah.
things like that.
Yep,
And
we
we
have.
try to, reach a consensus budget before we hit town meeting, something that they can support at town meetings. We're all in this together. No one wants to be on the floor of town meeting with the school committee against the FinCom, right?
Like last year.
And it can be challenging. So I think the goal is to try to work something out, but it's just not realistic that before early February we're going to have updated numbers.
I know.
Right? Or much more updated from this point on, because all of those things come in end of January into February. So
Yeah, we just.
we'll go there.
I apologize. A couple things going on in our schools right now, so I'm sorry about that. I know you're on this slide right here.
Yep.
This, and I know you probably already talked about that
Nope.
asterisk in the bottom of.
No, but we will.
Okay, you haven't reached that last slide yet. Okay.
Yep. So
I was just going through. No, it's on this.
earlier on I shared that, so this is page 3, the top
Yeah.
of page 3.
We did talk. No, he's talking about how you talked about.
We
how
did
the
talk
staff-
about
yeah.
it, yes, the agency, but there's that's more of a clear note to
Yeah.
the cost of.
You said you guys are going to be working to hire
Yeah.
internally.
So
Yes.
So next page, one of the things I've done is break everything out into cost centers. The district and you've always had BMS, BES, and Tohoto. I have pulled the district out as a separate cost center. I will still be assessing it and allocating it everything exactly the way it's done. What has happened in the past is the central office has been sort of built into the Berlin Memorial budget, the Berlin Elementary budget, and the Tohoto budget in sort of a proportionate way. I think this is a little more transparent about what you're really spending on your central office. It also is much more efficient. One of the challenges we deal with is we have 3 separate account numbers, so everything in my office has 3 separate account numbers for it. So I have a BES number, a BMS number, and a Tohoto number. We really should just have one account number for that, and then that is assessed according to the formula to the towns, in accordance with the regional agreement. So it's the same thing, but it makes things more efficient. It also means what I've seen that's happened in the past year going through the budget is everyone's looking at, we've got to cut the BMS budget, so they start cutting things, and so things are basically a 3-legged stool. Well, someone says, well, I don't know what that is, we should cut it. So they cut one of the 3 items out of the budget without realizing that it's an integral part of, say, a superintendent item or a business administrator item. So it looks like that was done. There are a couple budget line items where in the budget there are only 2 components of it. And so it looks like someone may have made cuts and pulled out the BMS component or the BES component of it in order to make the budget match. But you'd really have to cut the whole thing, right? You can't just pull out one piece, and now BMS isn't paying for something that the rest of the district is paying for. So it clears up a lot of that. It makes it cleaner. And it's proper accounting. You should have cost centers for all of your major areas. So
I think the things that were cut were supposed to be cut from both.
yeah.
There were a few things, I think, like reading coach, math coach, that they were going to cut just from Berlin, and but those people spend part of their time over there and part their time. I think they just got rid of the reading coach altogether. I don't know what they did in the budget with it, but I think what was going to happen is there was some money that was supposed to go back to Boylston because we did cut some district-wide
Possibly.
things. Yeah.
I
don't know.
can't speak to what the intent was.
But that would be why. But I like this
Right.
better. I think it's
Yep.
easier.
Yep.
How are you going to divide up your district-wide? Because when you're doing your assessment, I know we talked about that 50, 20, 25, 25 split is not really ideal. It's not. So what are you thinking? You're going to use the same as Tohoto,
For now, I've used the 50, 25, 25.
You're keeping that,
Which
okay.
is so I did go back to Rob Connery.
Yes,
I
we
spoke
talked
with
about that,
him. He was very clear. This is the way it was always done back to the before time when it was 3 separate districts, and it just got carried over. We probably should have a conversation about what that looks like in the long run.
Yeah.
And maybe that does need to be a little bit adjusted. But it's going to be really hard for me to back out of that now. right, for all of us to back out of that now. But I think maybe
Right.
next year.
Because it'll screw with the assessments.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah. And there's also a few other things. So in talking to the principals about doing all of this and the other department heads, we have a number of staff, say occupational therapists, that I'm not including in the district-wide yet, but they really are kind of district-wide, and we'd like to eventually get them into that. So I'm thinking of it as a little bit of a weaning. Maybe next year we work on putting the OTs and PTs or whatever, the people who, the real problem is we set them based on what we think the need is going to be, and then anywhere in the year their need changes, and Janelle will move them around based on that need, right? Because you have to go where the need is. And the problem is now there's someone who's putting in no time at BMS and all their time at BES because that's where the need has to be. And then the very next year it may shift. And that doesn't get captured in. So it really might be best to think about a few more positions as being truly district-wide, right? And putting in that district-wide pool.
Lots of them. Specialists they've shared in the elementary schools, so there's tons of positions that they go back and forth.
Yeah.
And it's not an even 50-50 split.
It's not an even 50-50 split. The there's lots of teachers and specialists that go back and forth between both elementary schools. And it's great because we save money. We don't need one for each, but it's really messy accounting.
And to Aaron's point, it not only just changes, but it can change weekly, right? So
Yes.
it goes back
Daily.
and forth depending what's taking place.
Yeah.
If an L student comes in, we have to assess them, then they spend the day there. It goes back and forth.
Yeah, so we're starting in the shallow end with it, right? We're just doing the things that are very clearly district-wide, right? Then we're going to try to talk about building into it over the next few years.
Until everything's in it, and then we just have a very clean formula for our
that would be what Desi wants. I want to be clear. I mean, I'm open to whatever. I think your current formula is a little unwieldy.
Yeah.
In terms of the way the numbers are calculated, but you could do something similar that still keeps the town control over the elementary school budgets with just nudging the formula a little bit so that it's not quite so weighty to figure out.
And it'll be so much clearer for our principals, right?
Yeah.
So when you're talking about their budget and looking at their budget, have some involvement with their budget, it'll be a lot cleaner for them to be able to figure out as well, too.
Yep.
All right, and I think that's a great goal, and then we can move on. I just want to say one other thing. We had a huge issue 2 years ago where the BES kindergarten had like 63 kids, and the Berlin Memorial one had like 13 kids for 2 teachers and a para, and BES had 3 teachers, no paras. So last year we had the town meeting, the school committee, and and Berlin, the budget didn't agree, but 2 years ago in Boylston, and I know you guys probably weren't, you didn't live in Boylston, so you probably didn't come, but it was a huge deal in Boylston, and what we were fighting for was the paras for that BES. But had we been like a true regional district where we could take some kids in Boylston that live on that Berlin side that might only live 5-10 minutes away from BMS and put them at that school with those 2 teachers and that para, it would have probably saved a lot of money because that year those teachers, even that whole class, it's still a tiny class. The kids, there's, I think now it's up to like 10 kids per class or 12 kids per class, but very, very small class that year. And that one at BES still massive. So massive. Right. So I mean, I think if we down the road, that's a goal for this committee and this group is to, kind of more standardly regionalize the formula. Then that way the kids can go between the 2 schools as needed by class year. Right. And that'll solve like a space problem for us. It'll prevent us from having to put a new building. It'll save money long term, right?
And there's some big money in preschool, right? So that's one of the things we really want to make sure.
Preschool, all of it, yes.
Absolutely.
The whole thing.
We really want to do, and we're out there competing right now, with all these private preschools as well, too. So there's some serious, that's one of the things, just know that's on my radar, what we're looking at, in particular for next year as well, too.
All right, All right, I think that's good.
So, next slide gets you can see there's some, Berlin's got a pretty significant increase, Berlin Memorial and Tohoto right now. The district, district is a little simpler. I mean, our salaries stay pretty consistent, right? So, and all of the insurances and things like that are still sitting in the schools, right? So it still gets a little tweaky. Like that's another hard thing to maybe start talking about and figuring that out later. But then getting down into, so what are some of the drivers for each individual school, right? Some of these are the ones I've already talked about, the health insurance, salaries. You'll see my note on salaries for Berlin, that 10.08% is, it takes into account that we have 6 agency paras there. And so figuring those for about $30,000 more each, that comes out to $180,000 more in salaries. So that would be 4.1% if not for the fact that we're having to hire so many agency paras. And those were not budgeted for in previous years. So they were just budgeted as regular paras. So that's where it comes, that's where it's hitting us all this year. If it had been budgeted for last year, but there were already budget issues, so it's hard to say because we've asked for another $100,000 to pay for agency paras. So our hope is we can whittle that down. I think I talked about employee health and retiree health. Homeless transportation, we do have some homeless transportation costs this year. And this is just on the assumption that that might continue into next year. Homeless transportation is something we just don't have a choice once someone is declared homeless. If they've been living here and they go live in another town, they have a right, once they become homeless, to attend their school of origin for consistency. I mean, the idea is, children who are going through homelessness are going through enough trauma already. So the state's opinion is we really need to keep them in their home school, right?
And just to caveat that is if they go to another town living in a shelter or go to another town and doubling up with someone, so they're living with Megan, right, or living with someone else. If they have their own residence or their own apartment in another town, that's a different conversation. It's only when they're homeless, right? And we have to provide them transportation. If I can go back, and I know this is a thing I'm working on. I'm sorry. Is this thing that's happening at Berlin with the amount of paras that we have is unacceptable to me, and I'll say that we have that many 1-to-1 individual contracts with outside agencies. First of all, we have a union now for our paras, right? So that's the first thing. And second of all, we need to do a better job in advertising these positions, right, with School Spring and other means of getting these communications out. The amount of money we're paying for these individual ones is a lot, and we need to look at the whole piece of it. So, it's a whole, I don't want to go too individualized, but, do we need to have all these 1-to-1 paras, right? And looking at individual children's IEPs and looking at is it a way of getting maybe 2 professional special education teachers in those classrooms and having less of the additional paras on there. Again, special education is not a life sentence, and it's supposed to be least restrictive. So it's a really big picture to look at. But it's not only for the best interest of our kids, but it's also following the contract that the paras have, and also the financial piece of this that goes along with that. That's a lot of money, and so just know that we're working on that. That's definitely added to my list of things that I've been looking at the last couple months.
Right.
And my understanding was that we didn't have any agency paras. I thought that they had cleaned that up last year. So I clearly, at BES at least for sure, so I don't know.
There aren't really any at BES.
Well, it looks like there's one, maybe.
Might be one, maybe.
And there's 3, I think
or
there's
2.
2 at
three
Toronto. I don't think there's many at Boylston. If there are, I can't.
Again, even...
Oh, yeah, so it's 2. I'm sorry. It's 2.
But I mean, my understanding was there were, and then they moved to hire people full time, and they did. So I don't know if that actually happened, or this was something we brought up last year, and Al, we just talked about the nurse, especially that floating nurse. We've been talking about that for years. That's a position that should be a permanent position.
But not even the full-time nurse at Tohoto was a contracted nurse.
Right, and we had said, I know for a fact that we had said we were going to move those to full-time positions last year, and that was going to save money in the budget. So I know I'm not blaming you. Obviously, that was something you guys didn't even know about coming in, but that was something that was supposed to be done, like, they were going to do it like a year ago, because they were aware, like, okay, and that was supposed to be a temporary situation. All right, we can't get our own. We're going to hire someone
But
through the agency, and then keep working to hire a full-time person.
That's literally what our agency should be for, right? We've advertised
to get us over a hump.
and we just don't have anyone. We tried it, or to Aaron's point, someone moves in, right, and all of a sudden we don't have that person.
Right.
The person is already moving in, and we didn't know about it, and we might post it, but in the interim, we're going to grab someone to use the agency.
Yeah.
The problem is, the agencies are grabbing people that might be could be employees of ours, right?
Yeah.
I mean, when you think about the benefits that we can have them come working for us as well too. So there's a big piece that I'm looking at.
Yeah.
All right.
And they have and we can't hire directly from them.
Right.
That's right.
Obviously, you
Hire
can't
a
just say, "Hey, just
non-compete.
go on our payroll. You've been here a year." Just
That would be
right.
great.
You can't do that. Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
So, a number of things there. Special education transportation, just some generalized increases in that. Tuition and fees is costs of out-of-district placements went up a little bit. It's the same numbers, plus some, I think, choice and charter number increases that we're projecting. So then, there's the total assessment. I won't get into all of that. It's all formula. You've got some Chapter 70 and 71 offsets that are all proportional based on the formula. Getting into Boylston, again, they have a lower budget, largely because if you look at the bottom, they have had some reductions in out-of-district costs, and that's, again, where we can talk about if district-wide, particularly, places we can get some reductions in future years. We could talk about moving some things on, and how do we in the long run work on creating programming and things like that, if that's what we want to do. Being a small district, it can be challenging. A big district like Worcester has a ton of programs, right, for students who have really specialized needs. We struggle with that, and the hardest thing is with a lot of sort of different sort of special education diagnoses that go on the rise. You get one kid, you put them out of district, and then you're spending $150,000 on that student, and then you get a second student and you put them out of district because now you're already out. But eventually, after you put 3 students out, you've got enough money to pay for a program. If you'd invested that money previously, but you've already got them out, it's really hard to bring students back in district once they're out. So once you start putting them out, it's a really tough struggle to sort of then create the programming, because you need the money to create the programming, but the money is going to all of these private placements now. So it's a bit of a catch-22 you end up in. So I know that Janelle and I have had conversations about what sort of programming could we do, and predicting the right programming is challenging too. You could put together the right sort of programming and then have a dip in those students, right? So again, somewhere like Worcester has a very consistent number of kids who have those sorts of needs, so they can have very specialized programs. We have some more generalized programs and do the best, but there's definitely room to just keep having those conversations. I can't say we'll decide to create a new program tomorrow, but maybe in the next couple of years we can be thinking about what's the next sort of step and what sort of programs can we work on.
Yeah, and that was another hot topic last year because we have this Bridges program at the elementary level between Berlin and Boylston. And I think we needed to hire another OT or a PT. We had some positions that we were using the money for to try to keep some kids in district. But to your point, it required upfront. You've got to hire these people. We need another special ed teacher. So it was a couple $100,000 of these upfront costs in that specific year. I think when we were doing the budget, for whatever reason, I don't know if someone moved or whatever. I don't know all the details, but the out of district costs had gone down. Now maybe 1 or 2 had gone in, but there was a situation where a bunch of people moved. Do you know what I mean? We had to your point again, we're so small, and then that was a huge thing that we talked about with Berlin last year. They were like, so are you telling us that we could spend this money on this programming and there could be no kids in it? And we were like, yes, we are telling you this.
You're taking a risk.
So it's a risk one way or the other. So I think that was just a hot topic button, and at what point do you at what size do you Worcester? Yeah, no brainer, right? it's huge, massive. But for us, where there might only be a handful to no kids one year that need this,
Correct.
it's a risk, and then you can't just like keep firing and hiring the, you know, because
Correct.
a huge chunk of the cost, as we learned, was like an OT, a PT, a special ed teacher, and like all these people are like 100,000 there, 100,000 there, 100,000 there.
Yeah.
So I just feel like it's a super complicated thing, and glad that you and Janelle are looking at it. But I know
Yeah.
that absolutely came up last year.
Yep.
In the conversations because of the volatility of the out of
Yeah.
district and the out of district
Yeah.
transportation and all that stuff. So I'm sure that's going to come up again, but I have like a very high level understanding. So glad you guys are talking about it. And
Yep. And we'll
it's out
continue to have
there.
those conversations. And if they go nowhere, they go nowhere. But they're just allow us to have conversations.
Yeah.
And then you were saying how maybe sometimes Boylston students could go to BMS.
They
and,
already
if
do
we
that.
could do that.
They
like,
already do that
they
in the
do that?
bridges. I don't know
Okay.
how you account for that, but I think I think like the older kids that I know it happened. I don't know if it's accounted for properly, but I know again they're putting the children's needs first. So
Yeah.
I think if there's a kid that and there's something at this school or they try to group them together, they're trying to do the best they can with what they have.
And,
Yes.
and they're
But
coming
it's super
up,
complicated.
They're coming up with a proposal that I'm sitting with Janelle and John and Cindy talking about, you know, the Bridges program and getting it in one location because the numbers in the younger grades right now are getting smaller, but yet the kids that are transitioning up to the older grades are getting more. So we're coming up with a proposal that we're looking at that will be hopefully in place for next year. But there's a lot of details we need to work out spacing wise.
Moving parts, yeah.
A lot of it. So I'm just starting those conversations with them, but
Yep.
we'll keep you guys informed of that.
Yeah. So most of the rest of that is pretty similar to, you know, so you've got health, you've got transportation, things like that. So a lot of the same issues, the broader issues. Boylston Elementary assessment, just again based on last year's formula on the next slide, top of 5. Tohoto, a number of the same, but there have been some increases in out of district. So if you look towards the bottom, well, there's 2 items actually. Substitutes. It looks like Tohoto has been trending high on substitute use the past few years. So I've taken that number up just based on need. That's similar to what it's been the past couple of years. I don't know what's happened the past couple of years in the other schools. They seem to be trending okay. I'm part of an organization called MASPA, the Mass Association of School Personnel Administrators, and one of the major topics going back and forth for the past 2 years has been substitute costs and the numbers of substitutes and the time off that people are taking. There are just more and more people using their sick time, and we had kind of postulated that would dip off after COVID. It stayed high. People are taking extended leaves for FMLA. People are there are more mental health leaves going on, which I think is the nature of maybe people just sort of saying they're not coming in sick anymore. Right, so we spent 2-3 years telling everyone if you have symptoms, you must stay home.
Your nose
Stay
is
home.
running.
Stay home.
Do not come to the
Yeah,
building.
it's-
Yeah,
yes.
For 5
now
days.
people are like, my
Yes.
head hurts right here, just a tiny bit. I'm going to stay home.
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden we're shocked that they're staying home. Well, we told them to stay home. I mean, that's
Fine.
kind of the logic to it. But I think there may be more of a culture of people using their time. It seems to be what's happening culturally, and it kind of is what it is. But my prior district, I was increasing those numbers for substitutes across the board the past few years. This year it seems to be just Tohoto. Maybe those other schools increased over the past couple of years as well, and they're at a point where they're at a steady state. But Tohoto just seemed like a significant increase over the past few years that we needed to address.
The other piece about that I'm careful on it.
Yep.
We're looking at the verbiage in the contract, so we'll be talking about that during negotiations as well
Yep.
too, regarding sick time, personal time, and all that goes along with that.
Yep.
So there's some verbiage we'll be discussing with school committee
Yep.
in executive session.
Is this something else that, I don't know, again, I'm not from this finance world, but it would be prudent to make a reserve fund for subbing?
Bless you.
I don't.
Or is it just, it's not big? it just seems like we know what we're giving people for sick time,
Yeah.
and we're
Yeah.
looking at the trends. But again, like I don't know.
Yeah.
I just feel like the more stuff you have reserved, then when
Yeah.
we have this volatility,
Yeah.
we don't have years where we're like,
Yeah.
oh wait, we needed to add a teacher this year, but we have to up it because we need to add 25,000 for subs. It's like,
So we do have some regulations in terms of what sort of funds we can put in place, but I've never seen a substitute sort of
Right.
fund. But with that said, there are a couple stabilization funds that are very common. We talked about capital possibly.
Yeah, capital.
But there's also special education stabilization funds,
Yeah.
right? This may not be the year to start a special education
So we don't have
stabilization.
one?
I don't believe, no, not that I know. But it's not that common. I mean, at the end of the day, I always say, why add a bunch more pockets if you don't have any money to put in your pockets?
Well,
right?
yeah.
So, if no one's ever had money to put into these funds, why create them, right? 'Cause
All right.
if you're not gonna, so if we get to a point where we have a good year and we're thinking like we're gonna have a good budget year this year, a lot of things are down, let's talk about having a special education stabilization fund and how we access that, because that can be really valuable, because special education can go up and down and all over the place. So in a good year we commit to put a little bit more in. On a bad year, we take out, right? It's a rainy day fund. It stabilizes our budget, right? And the towns need to kind of be on board with that, because you can't have them saying, well, when times are good, we want you to cut the budget by that much, right? And then when times
Yeah,
are
we don't
bad,
do
we
that.
want you to absorb it. If we're going to do something to try to smooth things out, it needs to be kind of a team effort with the towns,
Yeah.
understanding that we're going to always put 50,000 a year into it, or whatever
Yeah.
that number is. But then there's an understanding that with appropriate processes in place, that money might be taken out to help stabilize the budget, which is exactly what the term is for.
yeah, like in years like this. And
Yeah.
then the other question I have is, so like in April or May, could you be like, look at the budget and be like, oh, we're going to have huge savings here, so we're going to have like a big surplus, and rather than putting it into E&D or like choice, could the school committee vote to take funds from like the operating fund or money from the operating fund and put it into like a stabilization fund?
Absolutely.
I'm just flew right there.
I had another one on me. Oh my
It's a
god.
ladybug.
They're sticking to
They love this place. If you give it to me, I'll pop it on the plant.
I just saw it. Caught
That's
it.
the second one. It one flew right on
Were
my
you here when we
hand.
had the one before?
No, so
No,
the,
he was
the
on
second one.
the other part I need to be looking at, and we don't
ahead
have
now
enough
while I
data
take
just
care of
yet.
it.
It's crazy.
Right? But is what we did in Worcester and Hammond Wilbraham is building-based substitutes, right? So,
Yeah.
breaking down these subs,
Yeah,
whether
having
they
it be-
need
yep.
for a personal day
Yep.
or sick days
Yep.
and stuff. When you have one person
Yep.
every single day reporting, there's that consistency
Yep.
for the children. Consistency, they know the routines, but they also, if all of us are working there and we know there's a building-based sub, Megan is going to take take her personal day on Monday. I'm going to take my personal day on Tuesday. So we'll work it all out so we know we're going to have Aaron for our sub. So there's some flexibility and
Yeah.
some collaboration there that saves us money in the long run than everyone taking their personal days sometimes the same day.
Yeah.
So we're going to be looking at that as well.
These
too.
are all great ideas down there. I know. All these
So,
ideas.
final thing on Tohoto is, those private special education tuitions. You can see the asterisk that shows you we've got 2 move-ups, a move-in, and a new placement. So that's four new students going to out of district, which is challenging. So this is sort of the formula for the Tohoto, the next 2 slides, assessment. I won't go into too much detail. I'll be playing with that. In blue, down below on the second slide, is the Berlin contributions.
Yeah.
In yellow is Boylston. I just tried to color code them so it was a little easier once we put that together. So the next couple slides talk about the total Berlin operating assessments and the total Boylston operating assessments. These are pretty significant increases,
Yeah.
no doubt.
Yeah.
So we understand that, and again, we'll have those conversations with the towns.
And this
as
is with
that comes.
nothing new.
Nothing new. Yeah, but again, I'm hoping these numbers are high. We're talking, high estimates.
I know, but like, how do we even vote to add, like, if we want,
Yes.
like, how do we even, I mean, like, again, I'm just going by what I know. I know BES, and again, I know it because it's my son's class is the last small class at BES. He will be a 5th grader the next year. If we don't hire a teacher next year, you can't do 60 kids with 2 teachers. You can't do it. There's no space in there's no space in the classroom. So it's like, what do we do? Like, there's things like that. You know, I know, like, we had talked, I know, you know, last year, Janelle it was a critical need for a special ed teacher at Tohoto. I don't know if we still have that critical need. I don't know. Yeah. But I mean, like, we had to move that out of the budget because we couldn't add anything new. So, I mean, I just feel like this is a little...
And never mind even talking about school resource officers and all those other things.
Well, the SRO, we were like, oh, next year, we'll look at, like, we can't even think about, because that was like a huge...
Not yet.
The towns were like, no, the schools need to take the initial cost. The first year was going to be a $300,000 cost. Like, you can't even look with the equipment, the vehicle, the training, the uniform. Yeah, and then it was like another 100,000, 100 and something thousand a year. So it's like, how do we even look at any of this stuff that we know we have critical needs for? We're one of, like, what, every high school in the state has an SRO. So it's not like it's like a crazy ask. It's just, so I don't know. This is just very
I'm
frustrating,
couldn't
sad.
agree more.
Yeah.
It
just kind of stinks. It stinks.
Yep.
And MLC means
minimum, like, local contribution.
Minimum local contribution. I'm
Super
sorry.
complicated.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So the state mandates a minimum amount that each town has to contribute. You might hear minimum net school spending as well. So there's a minimum amount that every community has to spend on its schools. It's based on a number of factors. It has to do with property values and incomes within the town, and then numbers of students, right? So it all adds up into, and the state publishes it. So I'm just pulling it off of the state's sort of calculations.
Okay.
And then anything above that is that above minimum local contribution amount that so most school districts in the state on average are anywhere from 25% to 50% above that or more. So some districts are 200% above that. I mean, it's but, you know, on average, your average school district is somewhere 25 to 50% above their minimum contribution. You know, sort of the minimum contribution school districts are the ones you would think of. Springfield, you know, Lawrence, towns that just don't have the funds, the property tax base, and things like that to draw from to go above. So debt assessment is pretty simple. We have bonds, 2 bonds on Tohoto, and we have to pay those bonds off. They're basically like a mortgage on your house. It's all it is. You know, we pay principal and interest for a total payment, and Berlin and Boylston each are accountable for a share in accordance with the regional agreement. Interestingly, usually the debt is calculated at the time the debt is taken. So, you know, if it's 75-25%, one town the other, that stays in place for the entire duration of the bond because that's what it was, and everybody's planning for it. This is the only place I've seen it where it varies by year. So it is what it is. It just everyone's a little different too. So I'm not saying that we're out of whack. Every district I've been at has something in their budget that's different. So I'm not gonna. So then we get into the capital requests for the schools. These came, straight from the principals. There was sort of the beginnings of a capital plan in place. We're working on, this year was just getting the 26 stuff across, like how do we get it across. This year and into the summer, we'll work on building a 10-year capital plan. So that we know, hey, we've got a roof coming up in 5 years. We've got this. It's also, I think, a little sobering to see how big those numbers get when you're really talking about over the next 10 years how much money we're going to need to spend to keep taking care of these schools. And I think there's also the recognition that, the towns aren't necessarily going to be able to do everything. Right, we've already talked to the towns about we may need to prioritize this list a little bit. And the principals are aware of that. In Berlin, the one thing that's just a no we really don't have an option on is the elevator controls.
That's a lot.
Yeah. The state will shut down our elevator, so we need to update that. I think talking to John and Dan, the roof's pretty high up there. They don't necessarily need solar. We were asked to add solar, what the solar would cost, but
Aren't there like huge grants for that right now?
there are some.
But you have to front the money, and it's only like
Yeah.
like I know that federal, it's like 30%.
Yeah, so we'll definitely look at that as we go. I just, at this point, it's 9 months out before we can do anything, and we don't know if the town's going to be able to commit to anything on solar. We just wanted to put a number out there. We got an estimate on it, and it varies by, your total wattage, or I forget what the basis for that is, but the total power draw. So you could do a bigger or smaller. The other thing is, your average roof is going to last ideally 25 years. So the ideal time to put solar on may not always be right when you do the roof.
Right.
You might want to wait a year or two, make sure the roof's solid, make sure the warranty meets, and then put the solar on. So
You got to remember the towns own these buildings as well too,
Yeah.
right? So when we went to Berlin, they want to put it in either the driveway or the schoolyard, right? So
Yeah.
there was a couple of things
Right.
they said.
so they're talking about putting it on a post in
Yeah.
a field or something rather than on the roof,
Or-
which is an option as well.
Yeah, we did that in Worcester. We did them in the driveways. We thought it was great. We thought there'd be carports for everybody, right? Yeah, everyone thought we were all on board. Like, this is great. Until the first snowstorm and the plows had to come in. Like, all of a sudden now the plows were
Work around
charging
it.
us astronomical amounts of money, because before they used to go up and down the parking lots plowing like this, and now they had to go this way, and it took them a lot longer, and the snow was falling off of them and landing on.
Oh.
It became an issue.
was a nightmare.
So I shared that with them. So it's not as easy. There's a lot of.
I
work
am
that's
sorry,
going into it.
Boylston's capital numbers are not in here.
It's okay.
I missed that slide. I will add it and make sure it gets in for tomorrow night. I apologize. So Tohoto, I did on BAS make a note that BAS is building automation systems. So if you could check so unlike MLC, I used an acronym and made sure I cited what it was. No problem. So a number of items, I think, again, we're probably going to have to prioritize some of this. A couple items are carryovers from prior years.
Yep.
The challenge is, so a couple of these items are also multi-year projects. So the theatrical lighting and the sound system were meant to be 3-year pieces. They were refused by the towns in year 1, so we just carried everything over.
Yeah.
If the towns are willing to have the conversation, we can talk about what that can look like. One of the challenges is we have a lot of people who use our facilities. So if people are coming to do dance recitals,
Yeah.
plays, things like that, community resources, if our lights don't work, well, suddenly that's a problem for the entire community, right? So I think it's worth keeping on there and trying to. I don't think it's.
These are huge.
What are huge?
96,000 for the.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yep. We've got quotes
crazy,
supporting
isn't it?
those. Yeah.
It's like buying.
okay.
It's like buying
Yeah,
light bulbs now, right?
Yeah.
We used to be able to buy light bulbs
Yeah.
for such inexpensive, and now everything's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
the lighting,
Yeah.
the curtains,
Furniture.
like all of that has to be flame retardant. All of that.
Yeah.
It's just a huge.
Yeah.
And isn't the furniture like it's like little kid furniture in there? So that's like a quick
Yeah,
clean.
so I sat in
Yeah.
there, and this is actually pretty high for Lisa, and this is something maybe we can do over a few years, but there are a lot of middle school kids who are my size.
Yeah.
And I sat in some, it is elementary furniture. It's not middle school furniture. You can't.
It's really uncomfortable, I'm
it
sure.
really, even
Like,
for
get
someone a
some
lot
folding chairs.
smaller than me, it's
Yeah.
uncomfortable.
Even
I
the
can't
stools, like for
imagine.
the science labs and the labs, they're not set up the right way. Right? We really need to make sure.
Yeah, I don't
that
know what
stuff's
they were
so
thinking.
expensive. That stuff's so
Yeah,
expensive.
200,000. So I know we talked to Boylston,
Mm-hmm.
and they usually, I think Berlin does the same. Well, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know what they do for Tohoto. I think for BMS they use free cash.
Yep.
So it all depends on what they have. They got to certify their free cash, but they use about they don't use all the free cash for the schools. They use maybe like about half, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think in Boylston, I think we said they don't even have 500,000, right?
Yeah.
It was low,
Yeah,
like
it was
for the free
low.
cash.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
You know, and this doesn't even have,
is up
we don't
there
even have
too.
BES. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I apologize.
The other question I had was, I
looked
know,
at that.
like, we had a new lease with Berlin.
New what?
A new lease last
Okay.
year.
Mhm.
We had a lease that we signed last year, and my understanding
New
was
lease
like
with Berlin or
Berlin.
Berlin. Okay.
Yep, for BMS.
Oh, for BMS. Okay.
Yep, sorry, going back to BMS.
Just making sure.
My understanding of the lease was like anything for the building, like the elevator controls, the solar,
Yeah.
the roof, even the mini splits. That would be the responsibility of the town.
Yep.
Anything that was like a small capital item, like, you know, the blinds, okay, the school.
I wanna say the
floor
number-
scrubber, stuff like
Yep.
that, the devices, that's schools. So we had kind of like gone, again, I don't know how you guys want to manage that, but it was in the lease, like they were going to, the roof, the solar, like the town was going to take care of that, and that would be on their budget. It doesn't, at the end of the day,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. It's all come from the same place, the taxpayers, the free cash, right?
Yeah.
That's how they
Yeah.
fund their capital over there.
Yep.
So I just think, you know, like in Boylston, I know last year
Yeah.
we'd taken the roof off. And it's just one less thing for you to manage, because we don't own the building. It's their building.
Yep.
At the end of the day, we're paying them rent to use it.
Right.
So again, I don't know how you want to manage that, but that was kind of the agreement we had last year. And then Boylston, like I said, got really messy and confusing. We don't have the lease. We never finished. I don't know where the lease stands with them.
Okay.
But I know for a fact, Carol and I signed a lease with
Yeah.
Berlin in the spring, and it was, you know, anything over, I can't remember the amount,
I thought it was
20,000 or
10,000.
something. Yeah,
That
something
was
like
10.
that.
Yeah, that's
So,
why
like,
all these are over
the
10.
roof, replace the roof, like that would just be the
Yeah.
town.
Yeah.
We can say, hey, we think, but at the end of the
Right.
day, it's their decision, it's their call, and it's their contractors and their job, and so
We presented that exact list when we went to Berlin, right? So to their capital meetings as well.
yeah, their capital meeting, right?
Yeah,
So they
we
can
went.
decide.
They
Yeah,
can
yeah,
decide.
yeah, yeah.
To your point,
Yep.
the money's going to come to us one way or another.
One way
right?
or the other, yeah.
What are you looking for?
What are we looking for?
Down in the
Down
right
the hall on the
Down
right-hand
yeah.
side, just past the water fountain there.
Right before the brick
before
wall.
the brick, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So that gets
All right,
us
that's
through pretty much everything there.
Yep.
I will add Boylston for tomorrow night. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
Good catch.
So getting to 25, I'm not going through this whole
No.
thing right now. This is the
This is good, I'll
so
look at
what I want to do is I want to understand, and maybe we can have this conversation tomorrow night. I shared this, but this will get you guys thinking about it. Is what's a meaningful report to you, right? So if I produce a 36-page report. I'm sorry. This is
I like
this
this.
is only 35. If
like
this is
this.
meaningful to you
Yes.
and you can work with it, that's fine. If so, at Hamden Wilbraham, I actually produced something in Excel. I took the major sort of those DOE function areas, and I grouped them up, and I just gave them a report of that was 2 pages.
That's what
right.
they
So
wanted.
Is this in Excel?
this is
Okay.
not an Excel. No.
I mean, I'd love
No,
to
this
have
is a
something like
PDF.
this in Excel and maybe add a column for forecast.
I'm happy to give you whatever comes out. I think
Right, how
the
are you
Excel
supposed to
version
do
of
it?
this
Yeah.
isn't pretty. The
Yeah. I mean, that's
the
me.
raw data I can pull out. at
I
an
like raw
instant.
data.
That's fine. I prefer to pull like the raw data in Excel as well. But this groups it. It sets things up. You'll see this is done by location. So the first 11 pages are Berlin Memorial School, and you'll see like the school committee. That's Berlin's share of the school
Yeah,
committee, so
yeah,
it's
yeah.
confusing in the sense that you don't have all of the components of the central office in one place, right?
Right,
or
that's
the
how
money
this
you
is
have.
how
this is how it's been
iVisions
broken
is set
down.
up. Yep,
yeah.
yep,
This
yep,
is
yep,
well,
yep.
yeah.
Or whatever it's called.
Yeah, but it's. I mean, it's how it's. I mean, it's also. If we were to produce this report with the central office as its own cost center, then it would be a very different report. You'd have a 4th section that showed the whole central office. So we can't do that in this. But once we do it, once we make the change next year, we'll have a cleaner report for that. That's
so my
another
only
reason.
thing about reports like this
Yeah.
is when that gets into, because they're public documents,
Yeah, it's
right?
public documents,
Right,
yeah.
so
Yeah.
there are a lot of misunderstandings about that stuff, right? And so just something to think about, right? So the minute
I
we
don't
get-
think this should be distributed to the public, but I think
Okay.
this is just good that
Sure.
you have it in case somebody asks.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
I don't think this is something we need to, we're not going
agree.
to have time to go through this
I
in a
agree.
school
Yeah.
committee meeting,
Yes.
but like as the chair of the budget subcommittee
Yeah.
and somebody who
Yeah.
understands Like,
Right,
I wouldn't
right.
mind looking
So
at
I
this.
guess my question now to think about, and then tonight, tomorrow night also to think about, I don't think I need a decision tomorrow, is what would make the most sense to you as a school committee? What would be meaningful to the whole committee, right?
Yeah.
I could, if Megan just wants all the raw data, we can have that
I
conversation
can just
about
request
getting
that
the
from
raw
you
data.
privately, yeah, so it's not
Right.
public record. Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
for the school committee, so this is on the agenda for tomorrow. Like I've given this to Nicole, but I don't necessarily expect the school committee to take away from this a lot in that short sitting. The biggest thing I'd look at is the very last page.
I took a lot away from this. Did you review
No,
the encumbrance lines?
Yes.
So those encumbrance lines are accurate
So those are.
to the best of your ability.
So here's what I'm going to say. So you'll see if you go to page 35, you'll see there's $5.9 million in encumbrances, which is pretty typical. All of our out-of-district tuitions, all of our other things are encumbered. We don't have most of salaries encumbered. I don't know what they've done in the past to if they've. I don't think from when I talked to Rob Connery, he said they hadn't.
They never
encumbered
encumbered salaries. That's correct. They
Yeah.
always had it separately that had to manually be added in. So that's
right.
what this
and
budget balance is.
Right. So this encumbrance. So there's a lot left in the budget because of that. However, there are a series of encumbrances that someone put in prior to me getting here. They put it in August, September.
Michael.
And so there are within this, if you were to look at this, you might say, well, this is getting pretty tight for salaries, right? To
Yeah,
make
because
salaries.
that's all salaries for the
Yeah,
whole year.
yeah,
But but you've already paid salaries through.
Right. But there's
December.
Yeah. So there's
Okay.
there's about $1.7 million in encumbered salaries on this.
Because it's already been paid.
No, it's I don't know why someone encumbered it. Someone set up a single encumbrance for a whole bunch of like $3,000 of the superintendent's salary. I have no idea why. Like it's this
All before we
huge,
got here.
huge
So it's
encumbrance.
messy. So gotta get
My
cleaned
plan
up.
would be to just eliminate that. I have no
Yeah.
idea what it's for. I don't know why it's there. I discovered it when I looked at this and I said, that just doesn't seem right, right? And so I didn't have the time. I don't have the time to do that before this meeting
Mm-hmm.
and tomorrow's meeting. But there's an additional probably $1.7 million in budget balance that we have.
Okay.
Additionally, I really haven't taken any money out of choice yet. So,
Right.
and I think what we need to do, I mean, we know there are a lot of things that are expenses that weren't planned. I think what we need to do is look later in the year and then have a conversation
Yes.
with the school committee
Yes.
about here's what we probably need to take out of school choice, right?
Agreed.
Like, I'd like to do it at the beginning of the year, and school choice will be built in my budgets going forward. But I have no idea what anybody planned to take out of school choice this year. I don't know.
It was all for
what anyone
salaries.
planned to do it. Yeah.
All for salaries.
And that's another thing I wouldn't do. I wouldn't take it out of salaries.
Yeah, and that's something, like, that's not my area of expertise.
Yeah.
I just know that's what's been done.
Yeah.
So, Aaron, this is a really good report, like something like this.
Sure.
Do you guys, first off, do you know what an encumbrance is?
Yeah, that's a good.
Okay. All right,
I
Lisa,
just
do you?
had the training a couple of weeks ago.
Oh,
so-
all right.
Okay.
All right. Do you?
Yeah, we can
it's kind of
explain.
like what a forecast. It means that we've already committed this money, so it means that we haven't actually spent it. So it hasn't been booked. It's not on the GL. It's not part of like actual expense. But we know we have to expend it because something that's like under a contract or something like
Bus
you know,
contract.
yeah, like we pay it
tuitions.
every month, or like the leases to the town. Like there's no getting out of that. We own that building. That's where we're staying. We're not moving leases. So that's
Yep.
the encumbrance column. Most things like on a school budget are like under a contract. So they have a contract and they encumber it. There could also be like another column called forecast for like other expenses that might, you know, it's not on a contract, so it's not encumbered, and it depends on how they do it. Everyone does their encumbrances differently.
Yep.
But Aaron, so, and we can go over stuff, like if you have questions, like, because I learned so much.
That was a really good explanation. Larry. That was really well
had
done.
to learn,
So,
like,
nicely.
I am a finance by trade, but like I haven't done this since I was in college. But except for the past 3 years that I had to like get a crash course on it last
Yeah.
year when Carol and I literally
You know
went
your
through the
bills are
budget.
due, right? You don't have to pay them all up front
Yeah.
right now, but you better have your money. It's like a rainy day fund because you know it's coming, right? And you got to pay these bills.
You have to encumber it, yeah. So, Aaron, when we do budget transfers, something like this will be super helpful. Like, we used
Yeah.
to do transfers, like,
Yep.
quarterly. We did, like, vote, you know, like, to do the transfers.
Yeah.
Not saying that you're going to be caught up to do the transfers
Yeah.
now. I think we did the first transfer
Right.
last year, like in February.
Yeah.
But like,
Yeah.
there was like a one number. Like, no. We want to see like what is going on.
We
with
can
it.
do that.
So if you want to do, and like in Excel, and it doesn't have to have all these columns, but just like by line item, where do you need to make your transfers?
Yeah.
So
Fair
we can
enough.
see. And again,
Yeah.
maybe you have like a pivot, so you're just showing when you're presenting, you're just doing the high level cost centers.
Yep.
But for the budget subcommittee or whoever needs the detail,
Sure.
you show them.
We can do that.
And maybe tomorrow night you show them what we did for Hampton Wilbraham, how you presented to them monthly. And I think we have to be very cautious about having document. Again, it's all public information, right? But sometimes it can be misinterpreted. So maybe it's the cleaner way is.
And you have to know what you're looking.
That's
like
right.
people have to understand.
That's right.
Like, oh, that's what. Like, if you don't know,
It's only a small piece of it, right? It's not a whole.
right.
It's
What's
hard to
GL? What's range? What's encumbrance? What's like? Who the heck knows what an
So
encumbrance
someone
is?
looking
that's
at
not
that
in
last
finance?
page and looking at the salaries would say, there's not enough money to cover us for the rest of this year, right? And they might have to do some layoffs when it's not true. It's
Yeah.
just
Right.
the story that goes beyond it, right?
Or they might not realize that this doesn't include salaries and might be like, we've got 8.6 million extra, because that's what I looked at first. And I'm like, great, we don't have a cash problem, we got plenty.
Yeah.
But that's not the case. So yeah, I think this is a dangerous report for somebody that
Yeah.
doesn't have very
Yep.
in-depth
All
finance.
public information, but just you got to understand what you're reading.
Yeah.
Make a great Facebook post for somebody.
Yes, wouldn't
Yeah,
that be?
here's our
Yes, that would be,
36.
right? What are they complaining about? Look at all the money they have.
Yeah.
Spot on,
it doesn't
Beth,
include
right?
Salaries, yeah.
Yep.
All right, cool. Yeah, so, but this level of detail is good for when we have to, like, vote on the budget transfers. And again, you don't have to
Yeah.
have all
Yeah,
these
you'll have that.
columns, but just, like, if you do it by GL account, so we can see where the transfers are
Right,
happening.
will do.
So it's a
Good.
transfer. All right, this was good.
Nicely done.
So, was there anything else?
That's all those are the only two things I wanted to get across and have a conversation about
All right,
this
so
group.
a few things we got to talk about. Al, you were gone. If we're gonna actually do, and that's something you guys can talk about with Mike. And Mike and I can talk to you too about that. If we're gonna actually vote at, it's 124. So real quick, are we gonna vote on the 25th?
I brought up my sort of conflict with the 25th briefly.
Oh, okay.
It's not a conflict. I can be here, but we may
Well,
need
I
a couple
think-
days before. Or should it be a little bit later just to make sure we have everything tied up, I guess is what Megan's asking.
Yes, we went from two ends of the extreme, right? I think we voted like late March for
What's the date this time?
it's February 25th,
It's
which is
February
very
25th.
early.
Very early.
So, like, I would rather vote on a more accurate budget if, like he said, we're bidding on transportation. If we don't have that contract done, or, same thing with negotiations, like, where are we going?
That's right.
So, it's like, those are huge
So
drivers.
the later we can do this, the better.
Yep.
And that falls right after February vacation. And this way, last minute
Days
stuff
after, yep.
last minute stuff that we need to get ready for, where he might not be
Yeah.
available, like we need to be
Right,
able
if
to-
he's gone that week.
That's right.
And I think that was the exact same thing that happened last year. It's February week. Nancy had kids. She was gone.
Yeah.
I was gone. Everyone was
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about that offline. And then if we need
Yeah.
to vote on that, that's something you can bring up tomorrow night. We can make a vote.
Yeah.
The other thing is
We're leaving. We're all done right
we're
now.
literally
we're
almost
done.
done, yep.
We're done. No, please.
Beth,
Sorry.
I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind. I know, so like I go to all the Boylston meetings when I have like the loop in, like I talk to the select board. I know you know the select board well and the FinCom over there. So I'm wondering if you would mind kind of like being the Berlin liaison and like attending the meetings, the finance committee. And
That'd be great.
yeah, I think like once January hits, they start meeting like weekly.
Okay.
But I'm not really sure of the schedule. So I don't know if you want to reach out. That would be like a huge help.
I can go to what I can. I'm assistant coaching the cheerleading team.
Okay.
I've seen
I will
you.
go to the ones that I can.
Okay.
and
Okay.
I'll look at the meeting schedule
Yeah.
and see what days of the week it is and if it's
Okay.
feasible or not.
Yeah, that was the issue last year. It was really tough to juggle the kids. My husband's on the road every week, but they were a little ruthless with
Yep.
attendance in the meeting. So maybe you guys
Is
can.
it Tuesdays usually? Is
I
it
can't remember what day. No, it's not the same day as school committee meetings. I think it was Wednesdays.
Oh, okay,
Mm-hmm.
that's better.
Yep, and it was late. Later, it was like 7:30.
That's fine.
Yeah, that's the only problem. They're very late.
They're very late and they go
they're-
long.
Yeah.
Yes, very late.
Very late, and they usually sometimes there till 9, 10, 11. Like,
Yes,
late
yes,
wow.
yes, yes.
every week.
Would the
So.
school committee representative go like just for the school committee part of it?
They try, but they it was 2 years ago. Julie and I tried to go, and we were there for hours, multiple. And so last year, I just couldn't do it because of my personal. Like my husband was literally gone every week. I couldn't get a babysitter every week for a volunteer job, and I was castrized for that. I was beat down for that. So I figured this year we appoint, and I live 25 minutes away. So this year we appoint someone that lives in town that is willing and thinks they can do a good job, working on that, and I think that would be really helpful.
Yep.
All right, awesome.
Good.
That's it.
Okay.
Good.
Cool.
Okay, all right,
Thank
thank
you
you
so
so
much.
much.
Thanks, ladies.
All right.
Sorry.